Yeah.
There we go.
Okay. All right. I don't know. Can you full screen yours, Tamara?
I think it is, or do you mean get rid of the, let's see.
Yeah. Okay, I've started the recording of this because, as I mentioned in my email, we do have members that, um, for whatever reason, they're busy with their lives. We tape all of them so that everybody will be able to go back and view it at a later date.
Are you seeing
Full
the,
screen. Okay, now we go. Here we go.
okay.
Is
Do you see
everybody
the
seeing?
attendees?
Everybody seeing a bunch of people standing around a water garden with? Okay.
Yeah, okay.
All right. Sounds like everybody has the view of it. Again, I had a couple of people come in a little late. Um, we have Tamara Kilbane, who is the curator of the aquatics at the Denver Botanical Gardens, and I'm going to turn it over to you, Tamara.
Okay, thank you. Thank you guys for having me today. It's just snowed here in Denver and is pretty gray and yucky out, so I'm excited to look at some summer water garden photos with you all. Can you see the photos of different attendees on the side here, or are you able to see just my screen, like just the presentation?
I can see the attendees on the side.
I don't know how to minimize that. I can't even see my. Nope, that didn't do it.
Okay, now I
Hmm.
have you full screen. I'm still admitting people here.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so I think to get rid of the people on the side for you, Tamara, um, what did Jan say? Somebody
Looks
said,
like the
okay.
kitten escaped.
Oh, minimize participants done each individual. Okay. I'm still learning how to use this thing. So that,
Yeah, this is only my second time doing
right.
a Zoom presentation.
So if you want to try and minimize everybody, where everybody is, there's a above everybody's name, there's a single bar, a box, two bars, and then like
Yeah, I see
if
it.
you
I just can't
if you
see my
click on that
mouse.
single, if you click on that single
Right.
bar on the far left, it will minimize all of us.
I'm trying to do that, but I can't see my mouse at all.
Oh,
It's odd. Yeah, it's not letting me. I don't know the command to do that either.
okay.
Sorry about that.
You're good to go. I mean, if they want to minimize themselves on the side, they can.
Okay. Yeah, sorry about that. I'm just not sure. If I hit escape, I'm worried about what's going to happen.
Okay, most of my people are saying they only see the speaker in your presentation, so
Oh,
we're good.
good.
We're good
Okay.
to go.
Okay, great. Okay, well, hi everyone. I'm Tamara Kilbane, the curator of aquatic plants at Denver Botanic Gardens. And today I just wanted to share with you kind of an overview of the gardens, show you the different water gardens that we have here, highlight some of the aquatic plants that we have in our collection. And then I'll go through kind of what we do throughout each season of the year, starting with right now, kind of some projects I've been working on, and then talk about just a couple of other projects that I have been working on or have worked on in the past as curator. So just a quick overview, Denver Botanic Gardens at York Street is about 24 acres. And as you can see on the map there, the blue running throughout, that's all of our waterways. Some of them are separate from the recirculating system, but the majority are all in one large recirculating system that contains about 500,000 gallons of water is the estimate. And so I'll go through and show you just photos of each of these that we actually display aquatic plants in. But first of all, just some quick stats. Water lilies, we have 129 species and hybrids. Majority are hybrids at this point. I would like to add more species to our collection in the future. Over 400 plants total. Lotus, a smaller collection of those, 25 hybrids, about 40 plants. And those are more high maintenance for us. So that is the main reason we have fewer of those. And I'll talk about that a bit as we get into the fall photos. And the marginal plants, about 50 species and hybrids, and over 100 of those total. So quite a few plants that we maintain throughout the year. This is one of our smaller ponds in our bonsai pavilion. And so this is not connected to the main recirculating system. Just has room for a couple of hardy water lilies that we normally display in there, some Japanese sweet flag and some Japanese iris. And this is our romantic garden pool, so in the romantic garden. And it is also not connected to the system, the recirculating system. And so this one does, as with all of the ones that aren't really connected to this main waterway, they do stay warmer. So we take advantage of that and display tropical lilies in here and our Victorias. This photo is the summer before last, we had Victoria cruziana. And then this summer we had Longwood hybrid in here. And then those are star water lilies around the perimeter, which are the like Ronde Decay, Rhapsody in White, Carnea. This is another of our smaller ponds. I call it the Chihuly pool. It's in our ellipse garden. And we had a Chihuly exhibit back in 2014. And this is a piece that was commissioned by a few donors, and he made this specifically for the gardens, and it's called Colorado. And so I just have a few of the Bengal tiger cannas around that that I thought brought out the colors. Try to keep the colors kind of with the colors of the sculpture. So some hardy lilies that are in more of the sunset colors or reds, and then some cannas that also kind of match that color scheme, and some taro as well. And this is also a pool that we display the mosaic plant in, which is the Ludwigia, and that's native to South America and likes warmer water. And so I have found that it doesn't like our main waterways, but it grows and blooms well in these smaller pools that are able to heat up faster and kind of maintain their heat through the evenings. This is the top pool in our recirculating system. So it's right next to our science pyramid. So I call it Science Pyramid Pond. Four Towers Pool is another, I think that's the official name on our map for it. And that references the recirculating tower fountains in the background there. So that's the entry point for water in the system. And then it goes all the way down through the other ponds I'll show you. And then is kind of pumped back underground to these fountains. And so we've kind of done different displays. This photo is showing, I think 2014 or 15, we grew the IWGS New Water Lily competition entries. And I'll talk more about that later in my presentation. But those are lined out in the front, and that's why they have these labels that are just like I3, I4. So they were anonymous, basically, so that visitors and the judges, the official judges, could judge them based on their merit and not like knowing who hybridized them or the name or anything like that. This is called the Reflection Pond, and this, actually I call it that because of the sculpture in the middle there is called Reflections. And so this one we've done a display of different colocasia, the taro, the past few years, and the Gorgon plant, and then a mixture of hardy lilies. And I'm sorry if you hear my kitten in the background, he wants in this room, so. And then this is the Annuals Garden Pond, and I also call it the Zen Pool. This sculpture is called the Zen Doorway. And this one, we have the Rocky Mountain Legacy Collection on display. And so those are lilies that were trialed in the gardens years ago by Joe Tomasic. And a lot of those were hybridized by Kirk Strawn. So we have Colorado, Denver's Delight, which was one that was discovered growing in Berkeley Lake nearby. And this is right bordering our annuals garden. And then this is our largest kind of feature pond in front of the Hive Bistro there. And this is the Monet pool. And so it has hardy lilies, tropical water lilies, Victoria, and just a wide range of marginal plants and lilies in there. Can you guys hear my cat trying to get in here? I hope not. So just a couple more photos of the Monet pool. And this canna is called Tony. And it's really nice the way that the sunlight, when it's shining through the leaves, I just really like the color, and it matches really well with the longwood hybrid Victoria in the background. And this is the west side of the pond. So it curves around in like a horseshoe shape. And this is another longwood hybrid Victoria, some Bengal tiger cannas, and some different tropical and hardy lilies. Let me know if I'm going too quickly through these. This is also connected to the Monet pool, just separated by this sidewalk here, but the water actually does go underneath there. And it's next to our Le Potager garden, which is our vegetable garden. So this is a few years ago, and since I've transitioned this display into edible aquatics to highlight some plants that like lotus, taro, different plants that are used for food, to kind of blend with the theme of the surrounding garden there. And so then I just wanted to go through a year in the water gardens. So starting with right now, and many of your ponds probably look similar to this. It's covered with ice and snow right now. The white balls are actually part of our holiday light display. So our Blossoms of Light display, which is still going on, I think, for another week now. Usually it's ended by now, but the city has let us extend it because of reduced capacity. So those are in there. And so it's just some projects that I work on this time of year, since ponds are all iced over. Our labels are all taken out of the ponds in the fall when we remove the tropical plants and we cut back the hardy plants. So this is a hardy lily label there. Basically, I have a storage room that I alphabetize, clean all of these and alphabetize them, and get them all organized so that they're real easy for us to pull out in the spring, early summer, and just much easier to find them as we get all the plants installed first, get them where we want them, and then we pull the labels and install those. And then another thing I just finished doing is going through our tropical lily fridge and just cleaning up our tubers. So they're stored in Ziploc bags of water. And this is maintained at about 60 degrees. And they're just organized kind of simply in tubs by alphabetically. And then they're labeled. So basically, I just pull them out, change the water, use a toothbrush to kind of gently clean the outside of them. And then I'll toss any that are starting to float or they're obviously starting to rot. And then I keep an inventory. So I'll update the inventory of what is in the fridge.
Does the Arm and Hammer help with keeping them safe over the winter?
I clean the tubers twice a year, and in the past, if you go too long without cleaning these, they do get. I was wondering if anyone noticed that. It can be a little smelly in there if you have a tuber that started rotting, and sometimes the bags, the seals, don't stay sealed very well, although I've gotten better bags, so that's been better. But anyway, yeah, I can get smelly, so we put the Arm and Hammer. And then this is a photo I took actually just this morning. I went to the gardens and watered and took a couple photos. So this is what the greenhouse looks like right now. The tubs are pretty empty. There are a few things that I'm overwintering in there. Maybe can see some water lettuce in the back tub, and there's the mosaic plant that's happy in there year round. For the mosaic plant, I just take cuttings off of that when I want to put any out in the displays. So I take cuttings and then I just root them into a clay loam, and it does really well. So, and then I do have one Victoria longwood hybrid that I've overwintered in the greenhouse. And as you can see, it's got a flower that's getting ready to open and another bud. And it's just kind of been doing that steadily for a few weeks now. And then one of my coworkers, he got a seed off of his lotus plant at home. And so he brought that in. And so we got that started for him. This tub is maintained with just an aquarium heater kept at about 70 degrees and no supplemental lighting. So this is done pretty well. This is probably the third winter that I've kept one smaller Victoria in the greenhouse, and then I'll add it to the displays next season. And that's worked really well. I don't have space to do that with, too many, but it's kind of fun to do it with at least one. And then the Gorgon plant. So basically end of February, early March, we'll start getting the seeds of our Victorias germinating and our urea leaf ferox, which is the Gorgon plant shown here. And here's the Victoria longwood hybrid. And so we get these from Longwood Gardens in late fall. They send us the seeds and we just store them in the tuber fridge with the tropical water lily tubers at about 60 degrees. And then we pull them out, like I said, in another couple months and get those started. The tubs are maintained also with aquarium heaters, but at 85 to 90 degrees. And then in March, we'll get to start. This photo obviously was taken a while ago since these are a couple of my volunteers. Now when they come in, obviously we have to be wearing masks and making sure we're distancing. Right now we can't have any indoor volunteers, but we're hoping that will change by spring. But this is Brenda and Trina, and they're working on dividing cannas. So we save at least one container of each variety of canna that we grow. And then divide these, repot them. Some are sold in our spring plant sale, which is Mother's Day weekend. And then many others are saved or potted up into larger containers, about 1 gallon size, and then potted into the 16 to 20 inch tubs out in the ponds in May, June. And so the greenhouse, Kitten's made his way in. Sorry about that. So it's definitely coming alive by May. This is actually probably more like April. By May, the cannas have gotten even larger than that. And then these are some Australian water lilies that I've started from tubers. At that time of year, I usually have one tub dedicated to those. And I do have some water snowflake in the mix there too. And I think those were for plant sale. And then the glamorous work begins. Once it warms up enough, we get out into the ponds and start dividing our hardy water lilies. And so this is Brenda and Michael working on that. And we do usually save divisions for plant sale of these as well. So we label them individually, get them cleaned up and looking better, and offer those for spring plant sale. And so then people can kind of have a piece of the gardens as well. And then so this is probably early June. The Victorias are just about ready to go out. We don't put those out into the ponds until mid to late June. So we need to wait for the water temperature outside to be consistently warm enough for those guys, as well as there's a lot of Australian water lilies in this photo. And most of any hardy water lilies that we've purchased have already gone out by this point. And then we usually do get some tropical water lilies in from Florida Aquatics as well. And so just another photo, that's how much the cannas have grown before we put them out. You can see some water lily divisions in the foreground there. And those were for plant sale. And then we've got Ken and Stan. this is in mid-June, planting, sorry, here's my kitten. Um, so they're planting a tropical water lily, and we usually mix in some of the Landon granular fertilizer into the bottom third of the soil before we plant these out. And that seems to help them really get a good start there. And let's see, go.
Besides
This is
yourself, how
actually a
many?
photo of my volunteer. Oh, sorry. Was
I
there a
was just gonna,
question?
yeah, I was just gonna say, besides yourself, how many volunteers do you have when you go out to actually start planting the different water gardens that you have there?
Yeah, I have a great crew of Sunday volunteers, and the majority of them are with the Colorado Water Garden Society. I usually have 8 to 12.
Okay.
Um, this year, they couldn't, let's see, I think they could come back in late May, and that's about when the gardens was able to reopen as well. Um, so this year we actually had staff from other departments helping us to do some of this work, but we definitely missed our volunteers. Um, they're so valuable, so helpful, and we really can't do it well without them. So about 8 to 12. Sometimes any larger group than that, and it does get a little more difficult. But yeah, that's about a good size group and average what we average on Sundays. And then I do have volunteers on weekdays throughout the season as well. So usually at least 2 to 3 days a week, I have a group of maybe 3 to 4 volunteers. So a smaller group, and they come in and help with smaller projects. Or once we get into this time of the year, like in the photos here, just fertilizing and doing cleanup in the ponds, and so I have smaller groups that help with that throughout the season.
Like your Monet garden, how large is that Monet water garden?
Um, I'm not good with dimensions, but um, it's it's very large. It takes us usually 2 mornings to fertilize everything in there.
Okay.
So we usually work, I would say on average 3 hours in a morning. Any more than that, our ponds are only 18 to 20 inches deep, and any more than that, and your lower back just really is not happy. So, so it usually takes 2 mornings to fertilize it all. We have, gosh, a few hundred plants in that pond alone.
Okay.
So
Few
it's good
hundred?
size. Hmm. I
Okay.
mean, you can, I don't know if that previous photo you could tell, like,
Yeah.
I think there were quite, and I think I want to thin it out a bit, and I have started that a little with, there's some varieties have multiple containers of one same variety, and so I want to kind of
Okay.
get that down a little because maintenance wise, it is a little daunting, and then just visually, I think I want to see a little more open water probably. So that's another thing on the list. Um, and here, this is the Monet pool in the background of that first photo. So during the summer months, we have our gardens docents that they bring out our education cart. And so a lot of times we have a lot of visitors that have many questions as we're working. And so this is also a good thing that one of my volunteers can kind of staff the cart as we're doing like dividing lilies or tasks like that, and can help answer a lot of the questions that we get. And then Bill, this is Bill Powell. He's one of the docents, and he also does record keeping on the Victorias throughout the summer months. So he does measurements of the leaves. He counts the blooms and the buds underwater. He keeps data on what the weather is. And so just so we can kind of compare, oh, and fertilization, how much fertilizer we're giving them each week. So it's kind of just nice to compare year to year the growth on the Victorias. And then, yeah, already into fall. So this is October. First week, first Sunday of October, we have to start winterizing, even if the weather, like this year, it was so nice. And sometimes it's just so hard to do because it's so nice out. Everything's, the tropicals are looking great. The Victorias are doing great. But if you don't start, I've learned, if you don't start in early October, weather can change very quickly in Denver, and once it changes, you don't know, you can't count on it changing back. Uh, so basically, if you get we get snowstorms in mid-October, it's not always so pleasant to try to do this work once it's gotten cold like that. And then, of course, the plants aren't going to fare as well either. So we save, here's a palette of plants. These are pretty, like the cannas here. This is a canna Australia. This is a pretty large container for those, and we've stopped using tubs that are that large because they get so heavy. They're waterlogged. It's clay loam, and then the plants are massive. Um, so basically, want to save our backs as much as we can, and so we've actually downsized these into the 20-inch tubs by about 6 inches deep, and then some of the plants we can do in the 16-inch wide tubs. But anyway, we save at least one of each variety and pull those into the greenhouse. We do compost the extras. And then this is the red stem thalia. In years past, we've actually taken this over to the zoo, and they have a few different animals that actually love these. So I think they had said the elephants, they feed these to the elephants, and I can't remember what else. But we would bring like we just chop them back and bring the whole load over to them. And they're only, I think, less than 2 miles down the road, so they're pretty close. So that's pretty easy for us to do. And then we'll usually save at least one of those as well.
One of our members mentioned we can definitely relate to October winterizing in Minnesota.
Yeah, I'm sure you can. Yeah. Yeah, so it's a little more challenging here than the previous garden I worked in was in North Carolina, and then I'm from Oregon. So I was not used to these extreme changes in weather that can happen, especially in this Rocky Mountain region. There's been some crazy, like there was one day I was working before this polar vortex came through. Um, and I was working out in the ponds and it got a little breezy. It was so nice. I was wearing a t-shirt and then the wind started getting stronger and it dropped. It was, I can't remember what they said, over 50 degrees in a matter of just by that evening. So a matter of hours. And that was the year we had the Chihuly exhibit, and we did have some of the Chihuly even damaged a little from that. So yeah, that was crazy. But anyway, this is actually a photo I took this morning, but this is another task. I just don't have photos from the fall of doing this. But the lotus, why they're higher maintenance for us, is because we have to screen every single plant. We have Canada geese that come every spring and they love lotus. And I had never dealt with them really either before moving to Denver. So the first couple of seasons, they had quite the feast because I didn't know what was coming. I didn't know what they were going to do. They leave no trace of anything in the container. The soil's all gone. The tubers are gone. My volunteer said she was out there one day and she saw one swallowing a tuber whole. So yeah, they love lotus. So we have to screen. I just use this plastic kind of chicken wire netting and I secure it at the base with bungee cords and then have to zip tie it together at the top. So it is pretty time consuming and just labor intensive. So our lotus collection isn't nearly as large as our water lily collection.
I do have a couple questions for you. From Janet, how often do you fertilize your water lilies and the lotus?
For the water lilies, so it depends. On the Victorias, we fertilize every week. And we increase the fertilizer up to 15 tabs or more a week as they're at their peak growth. The hardy lilies and tropical lilies in general are every 2 to 3 weeks. Pretty much have gone towards every 3 weeks at this point. Just because of the number of plants we have and the amount of time it does take to go through and fertilize everything. And it seems that they perform just as well. So that's what we've kind of gone to, is every 3 weeks. The lotus are about every 3 to 4 weeks. And we don't fertilize those until they put up the aerial leaves. So it's a little different than the hardy lilies. We start fertilizing once they put up their first floating leaves. Did you say you had another question?
Well, she said, did I hear you? Victorias are fertilized weekly, which you are. Yes. You covered that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and those require some thicker gloves to do that task. So actually, Bill has kind of taken that on as part of his weekly, as he's doing his data collection, he's actually fertilizing as well.
How large of a tub do you put the Victorias in?
That's another one that we've downsized. Just, when I first moved to Denver, I wasn't sure. And I was kind of going based on North Carolina, that they would grow so fast that, they'd become too root bound if I'd used like a 20-inch tub. So I was using these 20, gosh, what were they, like 26-inch and 10 inches deep. So the bigger tubs are so heavy. My volunteers are such troopers. They didn't complain too much, but they're like, you might be able to get by with some smaller containers. So we did kind of trial that with a couple through the years, and they're like, okay, they still look really good. They're growing well. They're not getting, too crazy root bound. So basically, long story short, is that we do 20-inch tubs for the Victorias, 20 inches by about 6 inches deep. And then the lilies, most all of the lilies are in the 16-inch solid tubs. And then the lotus, it depends on the variety. So the smaller varieties get the smaller tubs, and then the large varieties, like Perry's Giant Sunburst, gets a 20-inch tub. And so this is in October, right after we brought the cannas in, so they're still in full bloom. It really makes a nice tropical kind of oasis in the greenhouse. And I've had my coworkers say how happy they are walking by and looking in and seeing all the blooms, even when it started to snow outside. And so I thought I'd just go through and show some of the varieties that we grow and display. A lot of the cannas and hibiscus and the taro I get from Plant Delights Nursery in North Carolina. And I just find that you can find some newer varieties that aren't available a lot of other places. So this one's called Orange Tiger, and it's a sport of Bengal tiger. But you can see the flowers are really pretty. They have the yellow and orange modeling on the flowers there. And this one is really fast growing. So it filled that container so quickly. I probably, for that one, I could have used a larger container. And that was a 20-inch tub. And this is another, I bought this one. I mostly just love the name too, but the foliage isn't anything too exciting, but the flowers are really pretty and they kind of glow and you can just see them from a distance. And they're this scarlet red with this very thin little trim of orange around the edge of the petals and a flush of orange at the base. So that one is really nice. And also the flower stalks are really long, so they're held kind of high above the main part of the foliage there. And then we do grow the longwood series of cannas, so raw, Erebus, this is Taney, and then I do have a friend at Hughes Water Gardens in Oregon who has created some more hybrids along this line. And so I have a few from him as well. Sunrise Trumpeteer is one, Casey's Delight. And I'm forgetting the third one offhand, but I'll probably remember it in a second.
I do have a couple questions for you.
Okay.
I do have one question. See, do you put a single water lily tuber in each tub?
For the tropicals, yes, most of the time. For the star water lilies like Rhonda K, Rhapsody in White, Carnea, I use 2 plants per container and I put them real close, root balls touching in the center of the container. And that way I get a nice, like a fuller bouquet of flowers. Most of the tropicals, I just do 1 tuber in the center of the pot. For the hardies, the rhizomes, we do 2 per container. And you guys know, I'm sure, how to plant the hardy rhizomes. So you put the cut edge at the edge of the container. So we put one growing one direction and the other growing the other direction in the container.
Okay. And then we do have a newer member. Do all cannas grow in water?
So I've found that there aren't too many so far that I've tried that do poorly in it. But I wouldn't say that they all grow well in water. I did. I've tried a couple. I'm trying to remember. My volunteer has said she's had good luck with Cleopatra, and I didn't. That didn't seem to like it. It could just be I had a weaker plant. And then I had another one that I got from Plant Delights called Red Tiger that I was real excited about. And for cannas, I put 3-gallon containers of that we've started in the greenhouse into a larger 20-inch tub for display. And of that variety, 2 rotted and 1 survived. And I brought it back into the greenhouse right away and saved it. But the majority of the ones that I have tried from Plant Delights, I've repotted into our, aquatic soil, and they've done really well. So it's not just the line using Canna glauca in the background. So like the Longwood series of cannas that are developed using a water-loving species in their parentage. That's not the only type that will thrive in the water gardens, from what I've found. I hope that answered the question.
We have another question. What is your mix for aquatic soil?
So I think I'm going to try doing some other mixes based on what other growers have said they use. But basically, up until this point, I've just used clay loam that's dug out of our gardens for different construction projects. So I haven't done anything special. I know some people mix in like turfus or different things to try to help the lilies to root better. Um, because if you do get, from what I've read and what I've heard other growers say, if you get too much clay in the mix, sometimes they can have a harder time rooting in, and their growth is affected. But from what I've used just from construction projects in the gardens, the loam, it's not a high enough clay content that it's really deterred their growth. So they've done really well. But yeah, I
So
think I'm going to play around with some
is it like
turfus maybe.
what you have been using, like a 50-50 type of mix, or?
I would say probably, yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
And what do you guys tend to use there?
I'd use whatever my friend
Whatever.
Jan Schreier tells me to use. I believe pretty much it's been a 50-50 mix. I use the turfus myself
Oh,
rather
you
than
do? Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, and I do have a volunteer who uses turfus, and actually I think I'm trying to remember if he uses the aquatic plant soil, which is basically it's just the little baked clay particles. But he has all containers. And I think the thing with that, if you use just solid, the aquatic clay particles or sand, because I know Kit Knotts in Florida used to just use sand because that's what she had. So she would just dig it up from the beach and wash it really well and use sand. But then if your container's knocked over and your plant isn't rooted in well, I've just heard it can be a little messier. And of course, then there's the cost factor as well. And with how many plants we have, this is the most cost effective for us also.
Right. And apparently we tend to need more fertilizer when you use the turfus mix.
Yeah, that makes sense as well because the clay is going to hold the nutrients in much better than like sand or turfus. It's going to leach out into the water. And then just a couple other varieties. Compact Pink, this one I have gotten from Oregon Aquatics. And then Chocolate Sunrise, this is from Plant Delights, and it is a patented variety. So there's not too many plants I have that are patented, but if they are, I have to be careful that I don't propagate these. I don't offer them for sale at the plant sale, and I don't even propagate them for our displays. Like however many you buy in is how many you're allowed to have, basically. And this is Tony, which I showed in another photo earlier. And I also have gotten that one from Oregon Aquatics. It looks a lot like, what's that one called? Is it called Intrigue, I think? But this one seems to grow a little taller and more robust. So this is the one I prefer. And then Canna Australia. I'm sure you guys grow that one.
We did have one other
And
member uses topsoil that has some clay in it. as their potting mix. So
Yeah, that's worked really well for us.
peppermint
So
flare.
knock on. And so then I've gotten more into collecting, adding different hibiscus to the collection as well. And these are hardy, which I love, because I don't have to do really anything too much with them. This one hasn't been divided in like 3 seasons, so I do. That's on the list, is divide this. But it's actually in part shade as well, and it just blooms like crazy. This one's called Peppermint Flare, and I love this one. It's called Berry Awesome. I just love this one. And so I did this in a container next to the Monet pool with some cardinal flower and different, like creeping Jenny. But then I've also planted it in the ponds now, and just it's overwintering. And I hope once they overwinter at least one winter, they come back the next season and just much stronger, and they really fill in the container quickly. So I'm looking forward to seeing that one. And then Luna Red. So there's the Luna series of the hibiscus that are only around 3 feet tall. So these are a little shorter, but then the flowers are massive. And then the largest plant we grow is the red stem thalia. And this is, and these are our mallards that just love the longwood hybrid Victorias. So yeah, they're a little bit. We had like 3 batches of mallards this summer, and so they got to the point where they were a little bit destructive on these Victorias. So they walk from leaf to leaf, and sometimes they tear the leaves as they're doing that. And then of course they go to the bathroom and they nap on them, and then they sink them because they all try to nap together. um, but anyway, you usually have a display. This is 3 different Victoria lilies growing in a kind of placed in a circle around the red stem thalia in the center of Monet. And then we also have red stem Sagittaria. So that one's new in the last couple of seasons. Pretty sure I think I got that from Oregon Aquatics as well. And then the dwarf papyrus, and we also have Egyptian papyrus, Mexican papyrus, and umbrella palm. And then I love this little, it's called Chiquita Punch, this bright orange canna that only gets 2 to 3 feet tall. And it's just covered in these bright orange flowers all summer. And you can just see it from a distance. It just glows. And then in the background, the colocasia. And I think that one is Diamond Head. And then in our Japanese garden, we've done different varieties of Japanese iris growing in the stream along the edge there. And then we have different marginals like pickerel plant, lizard's tail, hardy thalia that are nice and easy because we just leave them out all winter. So, and then just a few lotus. I've started getting more lotus in from 10 Mile Creek Nursery. So this one is called Red on Brocade Cloth. And so she's gotten a lot of varieties from China. This one's called High Cotton, and it only gets about 4 feet tall. It's a real nice one, double white. This one's called Super Excellence. And then this is a little miniature one that I'm real excited about from a hybridizer in Thailand. It's called Mancala Pathum. And so this is actually in the greenhouse. This was blooming in the fall, and it's gone dormant now. But I'm really excited about trying these smaller lotus varieties in little bowls and displaying those, maybe even in our bonsai pavilion, I was thinking. And then, of course, Victoria. We talked about the mallards there. We
So
don't
how?
grow. Oh, sorry.
No, I was going to ask, how often do you change up the um, placements or the of each of your water gardens as far as what you're going to plant? I know you said you had one of the water gardens that you put in the mosaic plants. The Monet looks like you have the feature would be the Victorians, but how often do you change up the surroundings of the Victorian?
Try to change them up every year.
Okay.
Just slightly, with the Monet pool, it's maybe just changing because the hardy lilies, there's so many in there, and to change anything too drastically with those is a lot of lugging heavy pots from pond to pond. So a lot of that is like oh, okay, I'll grow different tropical lilies from tuber this summer than I did last summer, or I'll order in different tropicals from Florida Aquatics, or mainly Florida Aquatics is where I get those. Um, and kind of, so I have a new sprinkling of lilies in there, and then I do get new hardies in, and some like the hardy tropical crosses. Um, but yeah, the mix of hardies and Monet pretty much stays steady. And then kind of sprinkle in some other new things in the mix, if that makes sense. The smaller pools are a little easier to, like I said, I switched that one pond over to an edible aquatics display. And then I've done like the Rocky Mountain Legacy Collection display, water lily. And then another thing is Australian water lilies. So I did a display of those in the Romantic Garden pool one summer. Um, does that help? And then I try to also change up the marginals. So, and especially based on like a color theme. So I'll do different cannas together kind of each summer to kind of make that a little different. And that's easy to do because they're pulled out anyway in the fall and put back
Sure.
in June. So, um, but yeah, lugging a lot of lilies around. I got to make sure my volunteers don't quit on me. They're like, why?
Okay.
um, and so we grow Victoria Cruziana and Victoria Longwood hybrid. We don't grow Victoria Amazonica, although I would like to in the future. Our pond, the water just doesn't stay warm enough, especially overnight, to grow those to blooming size. And these are two of my volunteers, Brenda and Peter. And they came out one evening and did a time lapse of one of the Victoria Cruziana flowers opening. And we also had a botanical illustrator a couple of summers ago come from Kew. And so we did a time lapse as well with our official DBG photographer. And then she actually did a cross section of a flower. And she used that to do her botanical illustrations and took photos and everything so that she could work on her illustrations once she got back home. Yeah, there's just an example of the mess that the ducks make. And then hardy water lily is just kind of highlighting some of the ones we have in our collection. Minkala Ubol is from Nopchai Chonsilpa in Thailand. And this one just blooms steadily for us with many blooms open at a time. So this is one of my favorites. Although I say that about like most of the lilies. But and then in the Monet pool, we do have Latour Marliac hybrids on display, of course. So Escarbouclet, Formosa. And then this isn't a Marliac hybrid, but it's from about that same time period, James Bryden. And that's a real steady performer for us and blooms full bloom probably a little earlier in the season than some of the others. Paul Harriet, Helvola, of course. And I've found that the geese love Helvola as well. So that's interesting. I've actually had to start screening those. Most of the hardy lilies, they're pretty good about leaving alone. Doris Holt is a tropical that I've gotten from Florida Aquatics. I really like this one. It has a compact growth habit, so the leaves are real close to the center of the plant where the blooms are coming from. So a nice mottled leaf. And then Tuanta is also from Nopchai, and that is a intersubgeneric. So it's an Australian water lily crossed with a tropical day bloomer. And that one is really nice because it's easy to grow and it tubers well. And you can't say that about all the Australian lilies. So I really like that one, and I've shared that with some other gardens. And then so some of the other projects that I've done in my role. For years in North Carolina, I grew the IWGS New Water Lily entries, the competition entries. And then from 2012 to 2015, we grew these at Denver Botanic Gardens once I moved here. So here's the photo of the pyramid pond again. And so at this point, we had entries in different categories. So we had tropical water lilies, the intersubgeneric, so the hardy tropical cross mostly, and the hardy lilies. And I know they've changed, you kind of have to change the categories based on what hybridizers are sending in as well. After DBG, the competition went to Longwood Gardens, and it was there for 2 or 3 seasons, and now it is at Naples Botanic Garden in Florida. So if you want to see these in person, you can visit that garden. But probably the most well-known hybrid that's come out of the competition is, I would say, is Juan Visa. And this is of sport, a genetic mutation of Joey Tomasic. And so Napchai, the same hybridizer in Thailand I mentioned, he found this growing in a pond full of Joey Tomasic lilies. And so it has, then the blooms vary. This one is an example of just it kind of has all the salmon pink kind of tinged petals with the light yellow flecks throughout. But we've found, I think the next photo is, so this is interesting that it has one of the Juan Visa blooms next to a Joey bloom, and that's all in the same plant. And then it can have blooms that come up that are half solid yellow like Joey and then half typical Juan Visa. So it's interesting. So that's probably the most well-known hybrid. They love this one in China. When I visited China, they all just had Juan Visa on display. They love that one. Purple Fantasy is a hardy tropical cross. This one's from Florida Aquatic Nurseries. And so just some of the, basically as the grower, I would take measurements of the plants and the blooms. I would take photos of the first day flowers, second day, third day. And all of this was so they could be judged by a panel of international judges online, so that they didn't have to try to come in person. I know they've tried that in the past, and that's not always great because not everything's always blooming on the same day. I'm sure a lot of people still tell me about the year that the IWGS had a symposium in Denver, and the afternoon before the group came to visit, we had a hailstorm, which is another wonderful thing about Denver, is these crazy hailstorms that'll come through, usually at the beginning of the season. And it shredded everything. And it was just, I know, heartbreaking for Joe and for the volunteers at the time. They had put all this work into making everything look just perfect. And it was just decimated. So that's another danger of doing the in-person judging. So even now they do the photography and also growers notes. So keeping notes. I'll show you just here. This is a photo showing the plant size and kind of I tried to always represent how the typical bloom habit was. So the next photo, oh no, that didn't, I switched it out. Sorry about that. Detective Erica was one that if it got over 90 degrees, it would tend to have some burned inner petals or stamens. And so that was something that I would note in the grower's notes. Any other things that weren't visible in the photos, I would include in the grower's notes so that the judges would get the notes as well as the photos, and then they could and judge the plants from there.
I got a couple questions for you. How hardy are the hardy ISGs?
So that's something that we have done is trial those at DBG, and the majority of them have been pretty hardy. There have been some that didn't survive for us, but I would say the majority have been very hardy. Detective Erica is one, great, and it has huge flowers, and a lot of flowers open at a time. So that one's, I think, become one of the most popular. There was one, I don't want to like point out specific hybridizers, but there was one that was really cool and like promising looking, but it just it didn't make it through our winter. And I mean, you have to trial them in other locations as well to, it could have just been a fluke, but for us it did not make it.
Do you do anything different with, I'm assuming, planting or overwintering that from normal hardies?
Not really, no. And
Okay.
our ponds are only 18 to 20 inches deep, so that's the depth that they get. Our pots are about 6 inches tall, so they only have a foot or a little over a foot of water over the crown of the plant. And when I talked to Mike Giles, and he's done a lot of the hardy tropical crosses, he said, "Oh yeah, that a lot of his can just freeze solid. He grows them around the margins of his ponds, and he's like, these things are hardier than you think." So, and it is true that, like, I don't think I've had any of his hardy tropical crosses. I don't think that any of them have died for it. We still have most of the ones that he entered. That was the nice thing about the competition also, is that the hybridizers, I rarely had to send entries back to people. Most of them are just like, we want to donate them to the gardens, and you can display them every year, and just agree that if you want to share them with anyone, you ask permission first. And so, yeah, so we still have a lot of these on display.
I have
But yeah,
one
no
more
special treatment.
question. What do you have to go through to import your plants?
For the competition lilies, we did have to get, and it depended on where they came from. We did ask the hybridizers, like in China or Thailand. Australia was really difficult, and they have really, really tight restrictions that the lilies would get tied up in, like the inspections on the way to us, and it would take 3 weeks sometimes. And by the time they got to us, a lot of times they just were dry. But for the other countries, we asked that they treat them with a fungicide first, so they fared much better in shipping, and then send us a large enough division, because we did have the hybridizers for a while sending us a piece of a rhizome that was only maybe 2 to 3 inches from the growing point. Um, Obviously, that didn't work very well. So yeah, and the fungicide, that treatment with the fungicide on their end before shipping them helped a lot. Um, Keeping, like, getting those to survive and take off more quickly. And then just the, like, phytosanitary certificate, so the inspection that they go through. But yeah, that was, and I don't really do too much importing plants at this point. It was mostly for the competition that I dealt with that. So yeah, I mostly get plants from, like, Oregon Aquatics, Florida Aquatics, 10 Mile Creek.
Okay.
So, any other questions?
Not right now, but I'm sure my
Okay.
members will come up with a few.
Okay. Good, good. And this is, speaking of Mike Giles, this is a hardy lily of his that I really love, called Wedding Dress, and I think the name is great too. But it has a nice compact growth habit, and just a lot of blooms open, and kind of blooms nicely continuously throughout the summer. So, and then I also love, I say this about pretty much every variety, but I love Manny Red. Um, and something unique about this is that a lot of the reds tend to burn in our climate here, not just our climate, but our elevation. The sun is more intense here, and a lot of the reds just burn up on us. This one does not burn much at all, and it floats on the surface. So the bloom, you can see the shape there is just really, really beautiful, and multiple blooms open at a time. So that is definitely my favorite red, I can say. And then another from Mike Giles called Myra, and blooms are really large on this one. I would say probably some of the largest hardy lily flowers of any variety I've grown. And then this one is from a hybridizer in France who actually got to meet at the IWGS symposium last summer, and it's called Reine du Bal, Florian Hanot. So I really love this one too, the shape of the flower, the rounded petals. So that's one of my favorites. And then moving on to some of the Australian lilies again, or the intersubgeneric hybrids of these. This is from Nopchai as well, and it's called Shrishan. And it has the species Nymphia atrans in the background, so that's why, in its parentage, I mean. So it actually changes color from the first day bloom, which is that pale, kind of the cream with the purple, and it changes color by the bloom next to it is a fourth or fifth day bloom. So it actually blooms for longer than the hardy lilies also. Um, each flower lasts longer. So it changes to that darker kind of magenta color. And that one has grown well for us and tubers well also. I don't know how I. Oh yeah, so that's what I was trying to tell you about was the burning of the inner petals there and some of the stamens with Detective Erica, and that was just something that I would note on the grower's notes. And then something else I worked on this past year was getting our collection certified by the IWGS. And so that's kind of a newer program that they've developed just to recognize different collections around the world and then to also let IWGS members know where they can go to see these collections. So it's on their website. And as part of the process, I just had to basically, these were the steps. Telling them the number of varieties that we had of each nymphea and nelumbo, so water lilies and lotus, and photos showing that everything's well labeled. We had good signs, and that we actually have the docents as well with the education cart. And then I had to go through and just give them a maintenance schedule. So this is just what I typed up to tell them basically what I was telling you guys kind of throughout each season, the work that we do to maintain the collection. And so this is an example of one of our signs. And this is for the Rocky Mountain Legacy Collection. And so, yeah, that's just showing the different lilies that are in the collection. So it just gives visitors a little bit more information than what they can get just from looking at the plant labels. And then for the past, I'm not sure how many years now, but I've been the international registrar for new water lily varieties. And so hybridizers around the world can find this form on the IWGS website, and they just fill it out for their new cultivar. And I have to go through and make sure that the name they've chosen is not a name that's currently in use or has been in use in the past. So basically the purpose of the registrar and registering these lilies is to make sure there's not confusion. So, and make sure that, just the set of guidelines is being followed. And so there's a international code of nomenclature that they give us a copy of, and we go through and make sure everything is following that. And so they just give us, they also tell us, or tell me like which cultivar does it most resemble, and so that's an important one as well. And then telling me how is it different, how is your hybrid unique from that cultivar that it closely resembles. And then they can use the RHS color chart to fill out this portion. Not everyone has access to that, so it's not required. But yeah, and then these are all published in the fourth quarter fourth quarter issue of the IWGS Journal. So the past few years, we've had about 40 to close to 50 new cultivars registered. So we've had from hybridizers in India, Thailand, China, and the US. And so that's been, I feel like it's steadily increasing each year, which is good. And then future plans. So I talked a little about wanting to grow Victoria Amazonica. This pool is not connected to the rest of the system. And so I think this would be a good pond, the romantic garden pool here, to add heaters to and try to get this one up to 80 degrees or like right around that mark, to try to get Amazonica to a blooming size, and then to also be able to better grow the Australian water lily hybrids to their full potential. So that's hopefully in the works. And I would like to work on some hybridizing myself. So this is just another one from Florian in France. This one's called Comet. And I think it would be fun to play around with doing different crosses and trying to come up with some of these really beautiful hybrids. And that is all I had. So are there any other questions?
So when you said you're looking at doing some hybriding yourself, what would that entail? I mean, is that where you're actually?
I think that I think that the main challenge would be um, not in doing the cross itself, but in growing out all the seedlings to a blooming size. So that's what the hybridizers need to do is you do a cross and then you collect that seed pod, and then you grow out, as many as those seeds as you can to blooming size to evaluate what are the best varieties that came out of this cross. So I think the challenge will be space for growing these out. And so I'm adding a couple more tubs to the greenhouse. And I'm thinking I'll maybe just start off like real small scale and see what I can do in there once everything's kind of out in the displays during the season. See what I can do in there. So,
Okay. We do have a couple comments. Somebody said it was very nice to see blooming plants when it's been so gloomy here in Minnesota.
yeah.
We've had a lot of temperature inversion here where we've gotten a lot of fog and we have a lot of rim ice on all of our trees because the air up aloft is so warm, and down here at the ground level it's colder. So it's been
Mm,
very gloomy. We've had,
yeah.
I don't know, when has it been? About 7 or 8 days since we've seen the sun.
Oh,
So
no.
yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
Oh,
Yay.
oh.
Um,
It's like that now here, but we're so spoiled. And I'm from Oregon, so when I lived in Portland, we went I think 30 days one winter without seeing the sun, and that was the winter that I was like, "Yep, this isn't going to work for me." Um and I'm out of here. But basically, yeah, we're spoiled in Denver because right now the sun is trying to peak out, and this week's forecast looks a lot better. So we'll get these snowstorms and we'll get, pretty cold and gloomy, but it doesn't stick around for too long. Um,
um, do
so
have a
I'm Joe called it sissy weather.
I do have a member says she's not heard of a Grogan plant. Can you talk a little more about
The
it?
Oregon plant. The Urali ferox, it's native to India, and the seeds are actually used. They're pretty popular there as a snack, like popped like popcorn. Um, and they're also used, I believe, in like as spiritual offerings. So they date back, a long time, and they're kind of tied into their culture. But yeah, this is a Gorgon plant that this bullfrog is sitting on here in this photo. And this was in North Carolina, and this bullfrog would come and sit on this leaf every day for quite a while. And I just could never understand how that could be comfortable, because they do have very sharp thorns on lining the tops of the leaves. You can see there, and the underside of the leaf and the stems. So yeah, they don't grow quite as large as Victoria's. They don't have the upturned leaf edge. And then the blooms are much smaller, and a lot of times they open underwater. So not quite as showy as the Victorias, but they do, like, the span of one leaf comes close to, I'd say on average for us, they're maybe like 3 to 4 feet across for a leaf, probably more around three. In North Carolina, they would grow larger with the warmer water.
Let's see here. Um, Jen was guessing that your Colorado Water Garden Society members would be willing to grow out your seedlings for
Oh, yes. That's true. That's a
hybridization.
good point. That's a good point. Yeah.
Well, they'll all be getting phone calls shortly.
Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't thought about that. And then I could just name it for them. Whoever gets the best, yeah, the best variety, blooming, then we'll name it for you. That's a good idea. Um, but yeah, that is something I wanted to do for a long time, especially growing out the hybrids that were entered in the contest and just seeing all the cool new creations that people are coming up with. It would be fun to try.
Well, it looks like your greenhouses stay uh, heated during the winter, so you'd have a
Mhm.
place to grow them.
Yeah, yeah. So,
That's a little
yeah.
shortcoming to Minnesota is you not too many people want to keep their greenhouses running in January and February.
Yeah, I imagine that gets expensive too.
Oh yeah. Okay. Which hardy water lilies do you consider to bloom the most profusely? How about recommendations for shady ponds? Okay.
Most profusely, I Mancala Ubol. I think I showed a photo of how many flowers are open on that. Also, Colorado. Colorado performs great here. It this summer it had, I would say, like at least 8 flowers open at a time. The majority of July, August into September. So I would say Colorado for that. Mancala Ubol. Um, Trying to think of what, like Wedding Dress blooms really well. Detective Erica, that one's becoming available on the market now. So that is a hardy purple. The flowers are probably, I would say, about 5 inches across or more. They're good sized flowers and multiple flowers open at a time. And like I said, it's been hardy for us. I haven't done anything special to overwinter that here.
Any recommendations for shady ponds?
Oh, for shady. James Bryden usually does well. I like to grow also the nymphoides, so not a water lily, but the little water snowflakes in part shade. Um, I feel like most of the lilies I've put in our shadier section over by the Hive restaurant have done pretty well. Manny red, a lot of the so for us especially, a lot of the reds because they do tend to burn in the full sun for us. They do well in the part shade.
Okay. Rich Saker. He now
Mhm.
recommends storing tropical water lily tubers,
Yeah.
pure meat, peat, pure meat, yeah,
Mhm.
pure
Peat moss.
peat
Yeah.
moss, yes, at room
Yeah.
temperature, less rotting.
Right. Yeah. I've done that in the past, and I've also stored them in sand, damp sand. Um, so I would say that that is an option for us. I feel like some of the things that work for him in New Orleans maybe don't work quite as well in Denver just because of how dry it is. And so I have found trying to store things in damp peat that I have to check them more frequently to make sure it's not drying out, even when they're in a Ziploc bag or a container, like a closed tub or whatever. But I think that, yeah, that's worked really well for him. And I think it worked well for most people. For us, I tried that for a while. I also tried Ken Landon's method with the was that like a cheesecloth that he wrapped them in? I forget what the material was that he would wrap the tubers in and store them that way. And I did try that as well. And also they dried out too quickly. So it was just going to be more labor intensive for us because we'd have to be checking them more frequently, making sure that they're not drying out. But yeah, I think that would work well for most people.
All right.
Did that? Okay.
Any further questions for Tamara? Anybody? Okay, not everybody type at once on me now.
Uh-oh.
I guess that does it for questions. Again, I would like to
Okay.
thank you for your time, uh, bringing us through the year of the botanical garden. Very informative.
Oh, good. I'm glad you enjoyed it, and I'm glad we could all enjoy some summer photos together.
Oh yeah, especially since we've had nothing but gray
Uh,
skies for the last week or so.
yeah.
All right.
When does your timeline line up pretty well with Denver in terms of like when do you start to be able to put your tropical plants out there? Is it about mid-June as well, or?
I'm going to let somebody else answer that because I'm not gutsy enough to try tropicals. I'm just
Oh.
a hardy type. I deal with mostly the hardies. I am going to. We had Kelly Billings spoke on
Hmm.
lotus. I'm going to try some lotus up
Yeah.
into my waterfall weir. I have a 300-gallon waterfall weir. I have designed and built a planter that will fit in the top of my thing there. So I'm going to try some lotus the spring in that one. So, but I I shy away from hardies. Unfortunately, I'm the type of guy who plants it if it comes back. If it doesn't
Mhm.
come back, it's like, "Well, let's just buy some new ones at the plant sale."
Well, a lot of that's a way to do it too. Just treat the tropicals as annuals and replace them every year. So I have volunteers who do that also. Yeah.
um, Hibiscus, they don't start forming leaf buds until July.
Oh, okay.
We have to warm them up in the spring.
Hmm.
Great presentation. Thank you. Excellent. Very informative. Great presentation.
All right. Thank you guys.
All right. I
I'm
am going to
not
stop
sure how
the.
to get out of this now.